Welcome, everybody. We are on the chapter 5 of The Art of War. And Jason and Amon, please get us started.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. Today we are on the 5th chapter out of 13. Okay, so just a quick review. From the first one, we talk about the plan. That's the we can call it the business plan, okay, the starting point. And the chapter 2, we talk about waging war, and Sun Tzu want to tell the prince about the financial plan, how much burden you need to plan. So the conclusion would be you should finish the war as soon as possible because it costs a lot. Your money is spending. You will have a cash flow problem. Chapter 3, we talk about the stratagem to attack. Okay, so how to attack. Okay, what's the stratagem? And then chapter 4 that's last week, we start to talk about the formation. Okay, so this one is kind of talk about how to defend versus chapter 3 talk about attack. Chapter 4 talk about defense, undefeatable. Okay, so that's Sun Tzu is talking about. So we will continue this week as chapter 5, and then this chapter is short, like last week, but as a translator, I find out it's difficult. Same as the next chapter, which talk about virtuality and the reality. That's my translation. I borrow from the common word, virtual reality, because something virtual and something real. So this chapter we call 是, and the next week we call the virtuality and reality. That's all very common language for all Chinese speaker. Okay, like 是, 虚, 实, that's very common daily language. But I find out it's very, very hard to translate in English. So today's chapter called 是, and if you are not interested in the war or military thing, but you still need to, still worth for you to read it, because I think this chapter, Sun Tzu used all metaphorical description to describe what's the meaning of 是. So I hope to the end of this section, we will have a good idea what's the meaning of 是, okay, in Chinese. And you probably will agree they will be very difficult to translate English. And then it's welcome for everyone to provide English translation if you can figure out what would be the best one. So Aman, you have anything to say about chapter 5?
Yes, I just wanted to add that reading chapter 5 out of context, sort of not having read anything else and just reading itself, it would seem a little abstract at times, because Sun Tzu will begin talking about the army and using metaphor like the moon rising and renewing itself, or the sun rising and falling. But this abstraction, when taken in with this lead up that we've had of sort of to use business plan language, a vision, logistics, a marketing strategy, and then a SWOT assessment of strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. Now we're into an idea that is a little bit more difficult to wrap our head around. 是 is a very ubiquitous Chinese idea, but asking Chinese to describe it, I think it's very similar to just at a knee-jerk asking someone from a Western culture to describe vitality. It's an idea we have, but what makes something vital? What gives something vitality? And so 是 is a similarly sort of omnipresent but amorphous idea. it does have these roots deep in military strategy. And so when Sun Tzu talks about shi, he's talking about it in much more concrete terms that have to do with not only positioning and formations of the army that we have just heard about in the previous chapter, but sort of building a momentum, having a sense of the proper timing for releasing that force. And there will be mention of timing when we get to verse 3, very specifically. I'm going to drop an image into the chat that everyone can look at that is, to my mind, a great way of describing shi. So you tell me if anybody doesn't recognize it in chat, but I'll wait to see what the rest of you think as the chapter goes on.
All right. So folks, would you like comments on the image, or shall we continue?
We can continue. If anyone's imagination is sparked as we go, we'll see what they think.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right, folks. So now we're going to do 2 readings. Who would like to read? Go ahead and type exclamation mark. We're going to go with James and Penny. James, go ahead. James, you need to unmute.
Thank you. A little late in figuring that out. Sun Tzu said, the control of a large force is the same in principle as the control of a few men. It is merely a question of dividing up their numbers. Fighting with a large army under your command is no wise different from fighting with a small one. It is merely a question of instituting signs and signals to ensure that your whole host may withstand the brunt of the enemy's attack and remain unshaken. This is effected by maneuvers, direct and indirect, that the impact of your army may be like a grindstone dashed against an egg. This is affected by the science of weak points and strong.
Thank you. Thank you, James. Next up is going to be Penny. Penny, go ahead.
Okay. This is a translation by Samuel Griffith.
No, I didn't use that.
No, this is the one I'm reading.
Good.
Okay. Sun Tzu said, generally, management of many is the same as management of few. It is a matter of organization. And to control many is the same as to control few. This is a matter of formations and signals. That the army is certain to sustain the enemy's attack without suffering defeat is due to operations of the extraordinary and the normal forces. Troops thrown against the enemy as a grindstone against eggs is an example of solid acting upon a void.
Thank you, Penny.
Excuse me, Penny, what's the last word you read?
Void.
Void. Okay, thank you. Yeah, the reason I be careful on the translation for last 2 words, because that's the title for the next chapter. So let me share my screen first. Okay, Master Sun said, generally speaking, governing many people is like governing a few. It is about division the numbers. Fighting with many people is like fighting with a few. It is about using sign and signals. Here is the difficult thing. It's 形名, okay? That's two words, 形, and some translation. I like the whose translation use formation. That would match with the previous chapter we call formation. But formation and the second word means name. Put together, most of the interpreter, including Chinese interpreter, consider this one. These two words means sign and the signal, what you can see and what you can hear. So basically, Sun Tzu is talking about you fighting with large, great amount of people or fighting with small amount of people. They are in the same way. It's about the communication. Use sign and the signals to communicate. Okay, so I think that's what Sun Tzu talking about. The third verse, all people in the three armies can surely withstand the attack from the enemy without fail. It is about maneuvering additional and regular force. So that's another difficult part to translate. 奇正, or you want to call 奇正, because the second word 正 means regular. That's no doubt about it. Okay, but the first word would be difficult because this word can pronounce in two ways in Chinese, and which means have a different meaning. And both work in this text. So you can consider this word as additional, okay, or you consider as unexpected. Okay? So they have this kind of meaning. So regular and not so regular. It could be additional force, could be unexpected force. So I think that's the meaning. So all people in the three armies can surely withstand the attack from the enemy without fail. It is about maneuvering additional and regular forces. The military impact is like throwing a pebble into an egg. It is about the virtuality and the reality. So that's face some difficult word. 虚实, I think this one we will put more effort on the next week, which means one translation, weak and strong, or solid or void, void or solid, okay? But I don't think any of them really reflect the meaning. So if you have been trained as an engineer, mechanical engineer, you probably know something called virtual work. Okay, that's a method of calculation. And in today's, we call virtual reality. Something look like real, but not real. Okay, so I think the best translation is pebble and the egg. Okay, so egg is some pebble and egg look alike, but egg is very easy to break. Okay, but pebble was not. Okay, so I think that's why Sun Tzu start to use the metaphor here. So he called it, he used the word 断. Okay, 断 actually is a grindstone and it's a whetstone. Okay, but I would prefer translate as a pebble because in today's whetstone or grindstone is a square, man-made, this kind of image. But original, the whetstone or a grindstone is like a pebble. It's like a rounded. So I think the idea is they look alike, egg and the pebble. They look alike, but one is breakable. Okay, one is solid. I think that's the concept. So I almost want to translate the 虚实 virtuality and the reality as egg and pebble. Okay, I think that would be the closest way to translate, in my opinion. So that's it. And Amang.
Thank you. And Jason did a wonderful job laying out so many of the challenges that come with this chapter and with the next one. In interpreting Chinese words that have sort of multiple levels of meaning that don't play across to English directly easily, because sometimes, like he was saying, sometimes the allusion is more to something being solid and something being hollow. Sometimes it's more about it being substantial versus a facade. Sometimes it's about it being real versus illusory or illusionary. And so trying to capture that in single English terms really is a challenge. But moving away from the specifics of translation, I want to look at this text as a whole and what Sun Tzu is beginning to tell his generals, the people who are learning how to maneuver, how to use these troops, that large forces, smaller forces really don't make a difference. It's always the same process. It's just scaled up, is what he is arguing here. Now, obviously, before we go into contemporary modern warfare and talk about the logistic nightmare of multi-continental theater sort of operations, in his time, the idea would be whether you have 100 chariots or 1,000 chariots, the flag signals you use, the drum signals you use to communicate with these soldiers across the battlefield remain the same. And the configurations you use are only increased, but still the same. I'm not a big football player, but I've watched enough to see how configuration on a field makes a difference, and how the moment, the buildup is sort of jockeying to try and see the other person's defense and put yourself in the best offense. And then at that snap off, or at that moment of action, then you try and defy the expectation at the last moment. There's something similar in what he's expressing here in terms of configuring your troops, organizing their energies, and whether you're playing with just a few friends in the front yard or you're playing with a full team, you know, of 11 on a field, the kind of fundamentals remain the same. That's what Sun Tzu is telling his audience here, is that don't get intimidated or bogged down in the idea that you have so many more to deal with or so few to deal with. Just remember your fundamentals, stick with them, and use them accordingly. Use the sure that they develop to execute your action well.
Thank you, Amon. Now this is open for anybody who wants to comment. You can either comment or you can ask questions. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. We're going to start with Bill, James, Joe, and Kwan. Bill.
Thank you. I want to start with the end of the paragraph where it says strong points and weak points. And I want to first draw a connection between that and the earlier sentence about maneuvering. So the connection is that one of the main purposes of maneuvering is to avoid leaving oneself with weak points that make one vulnerable on one hand, and on the other hand, to find moments of the opponent's weak points. And this can be translated into the language of momentary power advantages and momentary power disadvantages. And it alludes back to the previous chapters about how power advantages create a situation where victory is assured before one even enters battle. And then this connects back to the previous chapter's discussion of reading the enemy's strategic intention, which is a mentality and a mental disposition, off of the physical disposition of their forces and their maneuvering. So later in this chapter, we'll get into some more details on that. But right now, I simply want to close by mentioning this phrase, unexpected forces. So when each side is maneuvering to give itself a power advantage and avoid being at a momentary power disadvantage, and each side is deploying faking strategies and trying to get other sides to take the bait, and each side might even be using its forces to signal that it's taken the bait when it has not, et cetera, things can be very fluid. And unexpected forces means a force of the opponent where you didn't expect it, which gives the opponent a potential major power advantage. And the key to maneuvering is to balance chances, to use one of the five, the fifth method of military strategy from one of the previous chapters, balance chances. So, quote, unexpected forces means that one has to form probability estimates about where the other side's forces are, where they aren't, what they're doing, what they're not doing, what they're signaling with fakes, what they're not signaling with fakes. And it said in previous chapters that balancing chances is the key to victory, meaning forming estimates of what the other side's force movements mean for where they're going to be in the future and what that means for the shifting relative power advantages and disadvantages. And that's the essence of maneuvering in this first chapter. Thanks for listening. I'll pass.
Excellent observation. Thank you. Next up is going to be James, Joe, and Quan. James.
Okay, thank you. I thought that was very detailed. I hope I'm not repetitious. I was going to comment on the idea of a large force and a small, dividing it up into small forces. That reminds me of the way the army works, you know, with platoons and squads, platoons, brigades, divisions, you know. So it's a question of the generals understanding the mobility and the different types of effectiveness of the differently armed and differently constituted forces and constituted differently by number. It also reminds me of my son when he got interested in the group computer games on the internet. He always liked to. I sort of caught him. He liked to play the guy with the knife, the guy that would just hide behind the wall and wait for somebody to come by. Instead of the guy with the AR-15, so I thought that was interesting. So strategy is very important in determining the tactics of the different groupings on the field, and that's what this reminds me of. And then the instituting of signs and signals. Well, yeah, you know, and he hasn't read Husserl and or Saussure, so it's a great phrase, great point. It's in other words, these groupings of troops have to be driven somehow, and why not just make sure your signs and you've got all your signs and signals straight, so they know when to move and when to not move, and what to do. And then direct and indirect maneuvers. I think he's going to talk about that some more, but it's the whole idea of controlling the flow of the action by understanding indirect actions. Like, for instance, if you want your enemy to be unprepared for a certain type of attack or coming from a different direction, that would call for an indirect maneuver to influence the enemy's future action. And then the grindstone and the egg are that's the cream on the top. That's the if you've got the strong point and you can use it against a weak point, it's kind of like why not? So it's a lovely section. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Next up is Joe, followed by Quan. Joe.
Yeah, I just think that there's a lot about specific universals that when you're governing a big group or a small group, that you absolutely need good communication, need to be adaptable. And you need, as we'll get into a little bit later, you need to be precise. And those are universals. Whether you have a 1,000-man army or a 5-man army. He also talks about the idea of not necessarily using resources indiscriminately, which means that if you're using a small group of individuals, you can actually attack from a number of different areas as well. And actually, you'll probably have more precise communication and probably less risk as well in certain cases. Depending on the circumstances, of course, but they're less likely to be detected. And this is why you have like SEAL teams that go into, to very dangerous areas. in order to accomplish a specific mission. But I can also make this equivalent to the way you would also maybe manage, I've seen this done in consulting teams. And they bring in very small groups where people are very specific and they know their skill and they know what they're supposed to do, and they come in, they do it, and they do it well. And they have a small team and they're able to work together very efficiently and come in and make a big impact. Then you can see some people that take different approaches where they actually come in with a whole team, a whole slew, like literally 100 consultants, but it's a little different. And they actually, but regardless of the size, you still need these fundamental things to take place. These good communication, good precision, and as well as adaptability.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is going to be Quan, followed by Madeline. Quan.
Okay, so I would like to come back to the title of the chapter, 兵书, and the last 4 words of the first paragraph that can be translated as the science of weak point and strong, but also the science of emptiness and reality, okay? Because emptiness can be understood not as reality, but in sense of potential. And one of the possible translation of the word shu is precisely potential, because one of the things that we know in the war, in a battle, that when a war or battle is started, everything is becoming a chaos, okay? You can plan for centuries in advance, but you cannot predict what will happen once the war is started or the battle is started, okay? That's, I think, I'm far to be a military man, but it is simply common sense. And precisely the last 4 words, it's 虚实是也, I think summarize extraordinarily that concept of shu that can be translated with a lot of words in English, like momentum, potential, configuration, situation, what appearances, trend, tendency, and even cojones. But it has the idea of power, influence, potential. So those 4 last words, 虚实是也, that's really the essence. Well, essence, maybe it's a little bit exaggerated, but one of the main understanding of shu, meaning that battle or that war once started will provoke or will produce a lot of chaos and of unexpected situation, okay, or black swan, to use the modern terminology. So the commander the commander-in-chief, at least, one of his highest quality is to have that imagination that would see the potentialities, and that those potentialities would become realities. And the more the commander-in-chief is endowed with that kind of strategic imagination, the best his army will be protected against that chaos that we necessarily ensue after the beginning of the war, of the battle. I don't know if I am inappropriate here, but I would like to take a contemporary example, okay? The collective West thought to bring down Russia by some economic sanctions, and they thought that they would bring down Russia in a week. Well, in a week it's exaggerated, but let's say in 2 or 3 months. That kind of lack of imagination precisely permitted to Russia to get out of the situation, because what I call maybe clumsily the collective West did not take into account the various emptiness or the various potentials of that situation when the war just started. Maybe they were too stuck in one line of development rather than to imagine the different lines of development coming from the emptiness or the potentialities with an S. And I will finish in 30 seconds with the explanation of what of the graph of Shu. Okay, first, I like very much the graph in simplified character, okay? First, you have the symbol of a hand. After that, you have the symbol of a ball or pallet, and you have the symbol of force under as the third component. It's this precisely how you would be capable to handle, okay, the hands, the pallet or the ball, the situation, the configurations, with force or with skill, okay? And the first skill of a commander-in-chief, either in a corporation or in war, is imagination, okay? Because I know I repeat that for the 5th time, but once a war or battles is started, it's chaos, okay? So don't imagine that your first plan would simply deploy without any incident, because your opponent is not a dumb animal. He wouldn't imagine things to counteract you, and not counting black swans, meaning unexpected events. And I stop here.
Excellent point. Love the idea of potential. Let's go to Amon next, followed by Madeline.
I just had to say something very quickly. And Quan, I really hope that the picture I dropped at the beginning helped spark some of that, because I kept referring to it throughout your conversation. But what I wanted to interrupt to say was, Quan said a couple of things that I think the non-Chinese speakers may have missed, but the Chinese speakers probably heard and didn't think of. You mentioned the idea of shi and shi, which are homophones with different tones. So for us as Western ears, very often we miss that you switched the topic, even though the words were the same. So when he was talking about shi with a dropping tone, that's the title of this chapter. That's the symbol that he was describing. And when he talked about shi with an uplifting tone, that's that pairing between reality and virtuality, or substantial and unsubstantial. And I just wanted to point that out because I heard it. I know every Chinese speaker was just like nodding along. And I know that a few other people might have found themselves briefly lost. So I just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you. Thank you for being a great guide to the tones, because everything is being carried by tones. Meaning is being carried by tones here. Thank you. Next up is Madeline.
Yes, that was quite illuminating. The translation I was looking at, the one that I have had throwing a whetstone at eggs. And it was so illuminating, Jason, just to hear what that word would have meant, and to see the two as looking pretty much the same in terms of size and shape, but having very different qualities to them. And this whole discussion of the signs and symbols or signals, it reminds me of that presentation that Sanjay did a long time ago about how neuron nets could signal very effectively in a decentralized, non-hierarchical manner. And it had that demonstration of people on the football field. They all had flags they were supposed to hold up when they saw the person in front of them do it. And you could see that even one mistake in a hierarchical arrangement like that could propagate. But at the same time, it was very interesting to see how well overall the whole thing worked.
Thank you, Madeline. Great correspondence between neural networks and how they work together, and armies of systems there. We're going to go with Jason, followed by Mark. Jason.
Yeah, about the translation of, okay, first, thank you, Aman, to mention about the tone, and even, sorry, even Aman's pronunciation is not correct, but he can tell that's the difference. It's very challenging for most Western speaker. And so when like in Greek or other language, sometimes we will preserve the original pronunciation for some word. So Aman suggests, okay, how about shi and the shi? Let's preserve the original sound. But then again, shi and the shi, how are you going to differentiate, for the non-Chinese speaker. So that becomes very challenging for this chapter. And another thing is about the translation of 是, Kwang suggests a potentiality, and that's almost like 90% overlap with the word 是, but you need to plus another word, another meaning as like situation, configuration, and some dynamic thing. So it's difficult. And then I try to avoid the word potentiality because it may sound too Aristotelian, okay? And the same as I try to avoid for the ancient text translation, I try to avoid the word emptiness, because for today's English reader, emptiness become tied to Buddhism. So that's before Buddhism. So sometimes the English word has been overused for today. So I have to avoid, otherwise it will lead to the wrong meaning. So that's some challenge I just like to share with everyone. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jason. I mean, I appreciate this so much, because what happens is that over time, different words in different cultures pick up a certain meaning. And the moment you say it, people have all those associations. And when you're trying to carefully separate the meanings, this kind of careful analysis is fantastic. Let me have Kwan respond to this, and then we'll go to Mark. Kwan, go ahead.
Yes, I think that Jason's comments are very right, because the word emptiness is strongly associated with what is perceived as Buddhist in the Western world. Even and here it's my side, it's my contradicting side manifesting. Even the word void is associated with Buddhism, and it's a more fancy translation of emptiness. So I would like to propose maybe configuration is maybe a possibility, and here I explain why. Because the word shu at the fourth tone, okay, and I would say that for the non-Chinese speaker, maybe you can say, when you want to say shu at the fourth tone, you just do it with your hand, and when you want to say shu with the reality meaning, just do it with your hand. So there is no possible confusion. So it would be a ballet to speak Chinese now. It would be a sort of dance. But I want to go back to the possible use of configuration. And it's not only because I'm a Go player, because of the I Ching, okay? Because the 64 hexagram in the I Ching is called, each of those 64 hexagrams is called a shu, okay? And let's not forget that the Jai's translation is quite interesting. Bing Shu is translated as energy, okay? Meaning that there is a state of tension, a configuration of forces of disposition, of tension at the present moment, okay? So that configuration, precisely when the war or the battle is started, will change to another configuration. And the I Ching proposed 64 possible diagram representing what I would call the archetypical possible configuration in an interaction, okay? And war is one of the most energy draining interaction. So I don't have the definite answer for translating shu, but definitely changing configuration would be maybe a possibility. And once again, connecting that shu with the 64 shu of the I Ching, offering the 64 archetypical configuration in any interaction with humans or with with nature. I stop here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kwan. I just wanted to say one thing. I mean, this is a great thing about this forum, where this is the difference between writing and speaking. So Jason, when he's doing a translation, he has to write something that will be understandable to everybody. Whereas Kwan can come in and he can talk about the nuances of meaning of things and be able to kind of expound on multiple ways of using it. So I think this is just beautiful, going back and forth between writing and oral communication. Let's go with Mark. Mark.
Oh, thank you. So fascinating listening to such a long commentary on just these first 4 verses. I was struck by the idea of communication and how this has a psychological component to it, so that the psychological and the physical are working alongside each other in a way. It reminds me of chapter 2.2, where it said that as if the war drags on too long, their weapons will become dull and their ardor or their emotion, I don't remember what the other translation was at the point, but will also become dull. So there's a kind of parallelism between the physical and the mental, or maybe the psychological, I don't know. And so, and then the other point I wanted to mention, by the way, I'm still working on ma and ma. So I appreciate you doing that. And also in relation to Kwa, what you were talking about, the changing in configurations and the chaos. I don't know how many times you used the word chaos, but I kept track of them. And this makes me think that the strict dichotomies that Sun Tzu has referred to aren't always going to be that clean and neat. You know yourself, know your enemy, and you will succeed. Don't know yourself, don't know your enemy, you won't succeed. Know when to move and you will succeed. Know when not to move and you will not succeed, and so on and so forth. That these dichotomies sound more systematic than they're going to work out in practice. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Bill, if you could make a very quick comment because we need to move on. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll be brief. This distinction between fullness and emptiness can be given a certain interpretation given all the other points, which is that each side, so let's just talk about one's own side. One's own side is constantly receiving information that one is evaluating to distinguish the enemy's true intentions from the enemy's faked bait intentions. And sometimes the information that one's scouts and spies bring in enables updating of one's expectations or estimating chances of one's enemy's intentions. But sometimes the information they bring in is empty of informative content and does not enable one to update one's estimate of chances of the enemy's intentions, etc. So the distinction between full and empty refers to the value or non-value of one's scout's information, which informs all these other things we're talking about, maneuvering to conceal one's own weaknesses and identify the other's weaknesses.
Wonderful.
etc.
Thank you.
Okay, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. All right. So Jason, we are running a little bit behind schedule. We finished only 4 out of 21. How do you want to handle this? Do you want to?
Yeah, that's fine. We can finish. That
Okay.
I think we can finish. Yeah. I think
All right.
people
So folks,
and
let's
1 hour.
keep, yeah, let's keep our comments a little bit more concise so that we can cover the entire chapter, because there is some value to actually going chapter by chapter. All right. So let's do some readings. Who would like to read? Go ahead and type exclamation mark. We'll go with James. James, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. In all fighting, the direct method may be used for joining battle, but indirect methods will be needed in order to secure victory. Indirect tactics, efficiently applied, are inexhaustible as heaven and earth, unending as the flow of rivers, and streams. Like the sun and the moon, they end but to begin anew. Like the four seasons, they pass away to return once more. My page isn't turning. There we go. There are not more than 5 musical notes, yet the combinations of these 5 give rise to more melodies than can ever be heard. There are not more than 5 primary colors, yet in combination they produce more hues than can ever be seen. There are not more than 5 cardinal tastes, yet combinations of them yield more flavors than can ever be tasted. In battle, there are not more than 2 methods of attack, the direct and the indirect. Yet these 2 in combination give rise to an endless series of maneuvers.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe. Joe, go ahead.
I actually have the same.
Same one. Penny, go ahead.
Generally in battle, use the normal force to engage, use the extraordinary to win. Now the resources of those skilled in the use of extraordinary forces are as infinite as the heavens and earth, as inexhaustible as the flow of the great rivers. For they end and recommence, cyclical, as are the movements of the sun and moon. They die away and are reborn, recurrent, as are the passing seasons. The musical notes are only 5 in number, but their melodies are so numerous that one cannot hear them all. The primary colors are only 5 in number, but their combinations are so infinite that one cannot visualize them all. The flavors are only 5 in number, but their blends are so various that one cannot taste them all. In battle, there are only the normal and extraordinary forces, but their combinations are limitless. None can comprehend them all. For these 2 forces are mutually reproductive, their interaction as endless as that of interlocked rings. Who can determine where one ends and the other begins?
Thank you. Thank you, Penny. Jason.
Okay, that's okay. So I think this one is all metaphorical. Okay, try to explain the use of 奇正, or I translate as additional and regular, or some translation as indirect and direct, or unexpected and normal. Okay, so this kind of meaning. So here it's all metaphorical. So I don't think it's difficult to understand because it's very good metaphor. In all fighting, the regular forces of the army join together, but the battle is won with the additional surprise forces, because the good maneuvers of the surprise forces have endless change like heaven and earth, and have inexhaustible resources like a river and the streams. They end and they begin anew like the sun and the moon. They pass away and return to life again like 4 seasons. So basics, Sun Tzu used the heaven and the earth, river and the stream, sun and the moon, 4 seasons to metaphorical, explain the different kind of combination. Okay, there are no more than 5 music. Also use a lot of 5. Okay, so there's everything just 5 basic elements, but with the different kind of combination, you have endless change. That's what he want to say. There are no more than 5 musical tones, but the various combination of these 5 tones produce innumerable melodies. There are no more than 5 primary colors, but the various combination of these 5 colors produce innumerable hues. There are no more than 5 flavors, but the various combination of these 5 flavors produce innumerable tastes. The 士, okay, the last one talking about 士, 战士, okay, the 士 of the war. Okay, so that's another explanation, metaphorical description here. The 士 of war are no more than surprise and the regular forces. But the various combination of surprise and the regular forces produce innumerable maneuvers. Surprise and the regular forces rouse one another. It is like a ring which has no end. Who can exhaust the possibility of the combinations? So here is another explanation about the 士 as being used in the war. So it's kind of like a Quang talk about the configuration, but with some dynamic, different change, this kind of situation. So that's another explanation about 士 and 奇 and 正. You want to translate as additional, unexpected, and the regular normal forces. So, Amma, please.
I'll be very brief. I just say I think Jason's translation is excellent. And I think that the drawn out metaphor here is to make the point that a thing is simple doesn't necessarily make it easy, and that a thing is complicated doesn't necessarily make it hard to understand. So the idea of the 5s, 5 flavors, 5 tones, 5, this is the wuxing, the 5 transformations of elemental forces. We talked about this back in the Tao Te Ching, I'm sure, but this is one of those proto pan-Chinese concepts. All things are some combination of 5. Buy low, sell high, eat less, move more, be here, do the work. These are simple formulas, but they do not necessarily capture everything it takes to play the stock market, lose weight, or go to college. And incidentally, that last one is something I tell my students regularly: be here, do the work. It's really actually simple. That doesn't make it easy to do. So I think that's what Sun Tzu is communicating to his audience, that you have a really simple formula to work with, but in that it is simple, you can spin out infinite complexities.
Thank you, Amon. Folks, go ahead and keep your comments concise so we can go through the entire chapter. Say the same thing, but just say it in half the time. Next up, it actually works amazingly well, believe me. Next up is going to be Bill, Joe, and James. Bill.
Thanks. I will be brief. I will only make one comment per, section of round of paragraph. Okay, so the picture of strategy Sun Tzu is painting here can be stated simply as follows. One's own forces divide into 2 subsets. The subset that the enemy can see where they are, and the subset that the enemy cannot see where they are. The first is the irregular and the second is the extraordinary, or the better translation is the first subset is the expected and the second is the unexpected or surprise forces. And the key is to use one's expected forces that the enemy can see to do fakes to conceal the true position of the unexpected forces. And the myriad ways to do those fakes are, infinite number of ways to do it. And the art of those 2 rings in one of the strategy is precisely to use one's visible forces to conceal where because the enemy is constantly updating their estimates about where the invisible forces are. And if one can use one's visible forces to confuse the enemy's estimates, that's when the opportunity for victory appears. That's it. Thanks for listening.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Next up is Joe, followed by James. Joe.
I'm just going to really make a quick comment about the unexpected tactics that can actually be used in a particular circumstances. You can use deception, intelligence. You can use different maneuvering tactics. You can also use outmaneuvering, essentially taking the high ground or using the earth as it would be in one of the main principles. But again, all those things, you have an infinite number of not with the earth, but you have an infinite number of ways of creating confusion amongst the enemy. And so that's kind of the key where I look at it, is if you think about the chapter itself, it's based on energy. And the idea that you're actually going to expend less energy by creating an environment where there is confusion, or you have better information than your opponent, allows you to then focus your resources as efficiently as possible.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is James, followed by Paul. James.
Yeah, I was going to mention that I really like this section. I like the fact that he uses he's making one point that there's two different styles of approach to formations, and the first style is direct, and the second is all the various types of indirect styles, and that the multiplicity of these is innumerable, and that this amounts to combinatorics, which I talked about before. You just, once you think about the possibilities of the 5 primary colors, the 5 tastes, the 5 musical notes, it's like you end up and the 5 poker hands and so on and so forth. You just get into this the 5 cards in poker. You get into these very large numbers of possible calculations that you can make. So this is he's calling for this kind of complexity of mind that you can work on different formations, including moving in circles or rings, I think he says, but there's like endless kinds of movements and possibilities that can be used and combined. And he puts it, I like the fact that he layers that with the cosmic ideas first, and then the principles, the musical taste and so forth, the primary principles in each particular metaphor that he's drawing. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, James. Next up is going to be Paul, David, and Anne. Paul.
Yeah, my frame on this is related to the work I do and things like that, but this is the first part where I've gotten the strongest flavor of an inspirational tone, and I could be misreading it with my Western therapist mind, but we talk about encouraging psychological flexibility with modern schools of therapy. And this is it looks to me like inspiring the general to say, hey, get out of your box. A musician in the Chinese culture with 5 tones can create 1 million. Get out of your box, open your mind. And it has that kind of metaphorical, poetic, inspirational feeling, not just some kind of war manual. So that's my only point. That's how it strikes me.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Next up is going to be David, followed by Anne. David.
Hi, sorry I was late. I don't know if we're talking at all about any historical examples, but
not right now. Not right now. We are just focusing on the text right now. We will do historical examples once we are done with the entire section.
Okay, that's fine. Talk later.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you, David. Next up is going to be Anne. Anne, if you could.
Hi, difficulty unmuting. Yeah, I just want to note that he speaks of the indirect method in verse 5 and 6, and then he goes on with his 3 proofs. I think there's, a lot of time. He's spending a lot of time with these metaphors, if you will, to really bolster this concept of the indirect. And as I understood earlier, he was writing this to the emperor. Is that not true? That this was somehow one of his intended audiences? And then when he refers in verse 5
to the direct method, it may be used, he says, for joining battle, which to me, the implication is, you know, some aggressor is requiring you to join battle, etc. So it's almost like, to me, the suggestion of somebody who really wants to avoid war at any cost.
Thank you, Anne. Next up is Jason. Jason, go ahead.
Just like quickly respond to Anne. I truly believe this from this chapter on. Okay, Sun Tzu is talking to the general, so the decision already made. Okay, going to the war, what you are going to do. So that's my interpretation.
I have a quick question for Jason or Amon. So in this section, they talk about multiple examples of these fivefold patterns and their combinations on one hand, and then they talk about these two things, you know, direct and indirect combination. What is the relationship between the point they're making about the fivefold and this direct and indirect? Yes, go ahead, Amon.
Can I kind of tackle that, Jason?
Yeah,
so
please.
I mentioned briefly that the wuxing is a Proto-Pan-Chinese idea of these 5 transformations. Those 5 transformations are individuation along the spectrum of yin yang, which is dualistic. So when you have the 2 and the 5, it fits very well within the framework of the Chinese sort of paradigm.
Wonderful. Thank you, Amon. Very, very intriguing. All right, let's go for the next one. Who would like to read? Go ahead and type an exclamation mark. We're suddenly on time now. So excellent. Let's go with Joe first. Joe.
The onset of troops is like the rush of a torrent, which will even roll stones along in its course. The quality of decision is like well-timed swoop of a falcon, which enables it to strike and destroy its victim. Therefore, the good fighter will be terrible in his onset and prompt in his decision. Energy may be likened to the bending of a crossbow, decision to be releasing of a trigger.
Thank you. Penny, go ahead.
Okay. When torrential water tosses boulders, it is because of its momentum. When the strike of a hawk breaks the body of its prey, it is because of timing. Thus, the momentum of one skilled in war is overwhelming, and his attack precisely regulated. His potential is that of a fully drawn crossbow. His timing, the release of the trigger.
Thank you. Jason.
Okay, so we talk about 是, okay, in the translation. I think before this paragraph, I probably will agree 是 can be translated as configuration or situation. But if we start to pay attention on this paragraph, talking about the water, the drawing the crossbow, it's more like energy, momentum, potentiality. Okay, so that's a different meaning of 是 here. And Sun Tzu used a pretty good metaphor here. So it is 是 that make. Oh, before I talk here, let me talk about this word called 节. And then I think I use the translation as well-timed decision. I think I explained this word in analect, okay, because it has a moral meaning. Okay, so this word has a moral meaning. So if you pay attention on this word, if you know on the top, it means bamboo. So this word means the nut on the bamboo. I believe everyone see the bamboo before, right? The bamboo, they have the nut. And if you know, because I grew up in Taiwan, I know we have a lot of bamboo and we will play on the bamboo. You want to cut the bamboo, you have to avoid the nut. The nut is very hard, okay? So it's difficult to cut. So when you want to cut the bamboo, you need to make decision on the knot. You will cut on the upper side or lower side. So they involve in the decision, quick decision, sharp decision here. So this word has been used as a moral sense because in the critical time, you had to make a decision. So we will put this word as qi together, called qi jie. That means if you have this kind of energy or vitality to make a quick moral decision. That's when we read in Confucius analog. That's the meaning here. But here is not analog. Okay, so here is talking about war. So the word jie, that means well-timed decision, quick, right decision, life or death, this kind of thing. So that's the word. Okay. So here, Sun Tzu start to talk about shi, and the other word, jie, decision, is related to decision, right? Before, we talk about configuration, situation, the combination of different, and here, the shi start to talk about the other meaning of shi, which include momentum, energy, potentiality, and it's dynamic. So it involves a right decision, prompt decision here. So it is shi that makes the rush of a torrent capable of drifting stones. It is the well-timed decision that makes the swoop of a falcon capable of destroying its prey. Therefore, those who are good at warfare will create a perilous shi and make a prompt decision. Their shi is like drawing a crossbow. Their decision is like releasing a trigger. So that's it's talking about if you try to shoot an arrow and you need a shi to draw the crossbow, and you need the jie, right decision to release a trigger. That's his metaphor. Thank you. Aman, please.
Just real quick, I want to draw attention to the fact that in two translations, I counted 5 versions of interpreting the term shi to actually have different meanings. And each translator opted for some iteration of it that best fit what they wanted to express there. It's one of the reasons why I appreciate Jason's decision to retain shi as its own subject in the text. And other than that, I will simply put my reiteration in the chat for those who didn't see before, because I think it becomes even more illustrative of this idea.
Thank you. Next up is going to be Joe, followed by Bill. Joe.
Yeah, so I just basically what I'm be very brief with this. I think this is the ability to make a prompt decision, and in war that you're not necessarily given a lot of information and you have to make prompt decisions. So you make wise decisions, and then you're precise in your action and how you actually essentially execute your force. And so I think that's the second most important thing. But I think it's also important to consider this in the broad spectrum of things that we've been talking about as well, which is these all are related to not having a long and prolonged conflict. That if you're actually instituting this type of approach, that you're making quick decisions, that you're executing with your speed and force, that you're doing these things successfully. These are all indications that you're not necessarily going to be locked into a long-term conflict.
Wonderful. I'm going to give priority to people who have not spoken before. So we're going to go with Mike, Bill, and James. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, I see this part of the chapter of this type of convergence where you have the planning and the maneuvering and everything that's been prepared kind of heading towards something. And then you had what Quan was alluding to earlier about you don't really know what your opponent is going to do, that there's chaos waiting at the other side. So you can see what you know about war, and then you have your opponent and you're converging and you're going to meet at some point, and then you're going to actually execute something. And I find at that point of convergence where those three meet, that the consequences are the highest, because that refers back to what Jason said about life and death. So I find this to be the most climactic part of the chapter of what I've read so far.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Let's go with Bill, Paul, and then James. Bill.
Thanks. I'll couch my point in terms of the example of the Muhammad Ali example from a few weeks ago, where Muhammad Ali plays rope-a-dope for the first 10 rounds of a 15-round fight in order to tire out his opponent. And then after the opponent's all tired out, Muhammad Ali comes off the ropes and just dominates because the opponent's all tired out. So that's similar to the crossbow being pulled for the first 10 rounds and prepared, and then the decision in round 11 to let it go, to let the arrow go and let the torrent fall. So for the first 10 rounds, Muhammad Ali's trainer in the corner is constantly collecting information about the opponent's behavior to see how tired he's getting, whether he's buying the bait, whether he's exhausting himself. And finally, updating his estimate of chances, to use military method number 5 from the previous chapter, estimating the probability of the opponent having certain strength or weakness. And that's the point in this section about the distinction between pulling the bow and arrow back versus letting it go. Good energy is just having your strategy all the time on what the enemy's fakes versus realities are, what the one's saying, or finally waiting for that moment when the opportunity appears, because the new information coming in from one scout then tells you exactly what you need to know about the enemy's disposition, intention, and then you would go like Muhammad Ali coming off the rope. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Next up is Paul, followed by James. Paul.
Yeah, the falcon thing makes me think also for the first time as we're reading this about how much animals follow the principles of this book in hunting. I'm thinking of a couple of examples, like, I don't know if you've ever, like killer whales. We watched killer whales. They hunt seals, but like they will communicate, they will gather around, and then a seal will run on a rock, but a whale will slide up on the rock and scare it in the direction where the other one's waiting. Or in the idea of overwhelming force, like wolves, a pack of wolves camping like in Canada, they aren't going to try to bring something down unless they have overwhelming force. Like they apply these principles. I just think that's interesting, and the timing, and I just thought it was worth bringing that out.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. Next up is James. James, go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's interesting here. There's 2 different dualities, which I think are, it's very, very interesting to note the 2 dualities. Already you have the torrent of water, which is a symbol of overwhelming force, and then the swoop of a falcon, which is actually timed and in order to destroy the prey, to actually kill the prey. And in other raptors, it's very similar. They can use the gravity of their descent to create a larger impact and kill whatever they're attacking, or at least knock it out. Then the second one is the difference between the she and the trigger of the crossbow. So and I love your translation, Jason. Good at warfare, create perilous she, and make a prompt decision. So that's a similar. That's the analogy to the pull, to the energy or the pull of the crossbow, and the decision, of course, is the intention to release the forces, whether they be overwhelming or just simply superior. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, James. Next up is Mark. Mark.
Okay, I was wondering about the relationship of the wuxing that Aman referred to, the cycle of 5 elements that is reflected in so many of the metaphors that we're looking at here, as well as ideas like the 5 seasons and the 5 sacred mountains and things like that. And in the because the five elements are related as both generating and overcoming, the only thing that really overcomes water, according to that scheme, is earth. And so I was wondering, to what extent was the wall, the Great Wall, the ultimate, thought to be the ultimate bulwark against invasion, because that's the only way to stop an invading army that comes like a roaring torrent?
Thank you. Thank you. If you want, you can answer it now or later on, whatever you prefer. Let's go with Kwan. Kwan, go ahead.
So sorry for the delay. Okay, here I would like to bring something that is the deep misunderstanding about the Great Wall. Okay, the Great Wall is not a defensive stuff. It's an offensive machine, because we have to go back maybe 24 to 25 centuries. At the time before the unification of China by the first emperor, a section of the Great Wall were built because they were places where the troops can stay overnight and for many months. And it was a place for them to live in before going out to attack the ancestor of the Mongols, okay, the Xiongnu. So it's not really a defensive machine, it's more an offensive machine. And it never stopped any Mongols in the history of China.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Kwan. Great clarification. All right, let's go to the next reading. Go ahead and type exclamation mark if you would like to read. It's going to be Penny and somebody else. Penny, would you like to go first? We'll go James, followed by Penny. James.
Okay, thank you. 1 second. Oh dear. I wasn't prepared, but I will be. Got it. Okay. Amid the turmoil and tumult of battle, there may be seeming disorder and yet no real disorder at all. Amid confusion and chaos, your array may be without head or tail, yet it will be proof against defeat. Simulated disorder postulates perfect discipline. Simulated fear postulates courage. Simulated weakness postulates strength. Hiding order beneath the cloak of disorder is simply a question of subdivision. Concealing courage under a show of timidity presupposes a fund of latent energy. Masking strength with weakness is to be affected by tactical dispositions. Thus, one who is skillful at keeping an enemy on the move maintains deceitful appearances, according to which the enemy will act. He sacrifices something that the enemy may snatch at it. By holding out baits, he keeps him on the march. Then with a body of picked men, he lies in wait for him.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up is Penny. Penny, go ahead.
Okay. In the tumult and uproar, the battle seems chaotic, but there is no disorder. The troops appear to be milling about in circles, but cannot be defeated. Apparent confusion is a product of good order. Apparent cowardice of courage. Apparent weakness of strength. Order or disorder depends on organization. Courage or cowardice on circumstances. Strength or weakness on dispositions. Thus, those skilled at making the enemy move do so by creating a situation to which he must conform. They entice him with something he is certain to take, and with lures of ostensible profit, they await him in strength.
Thank you. Jason.
Okay, paragraph, let's see. this one, paragraph 4. I think this paragraph is more rhetorical. Okay, so because the Chinese word 分分圆圆混混沌沌, it's more rhetorical, describe the situation in the battlefield. So the troops are diverse and many. They may fight in turmoil, but shouldn't be in disorder. The situation may be unclear and chaotic. Their formation should be all around in order to be undefeatable. So that's the first paragraph. And the second paragraph is really a challenge because my translation is probably different than all other English translation. I'd like to you pay a little bit attention on that because the Chinese word here put 乱生于智, 怯生于勇, 弱生于强. So the translation, you need to make sure it's logically makes sense. So most of translation consider as simulated weak and or apparent weak but actually you are strong. So kind of like a cheating, meaning of you cheat the enemy, but I don't see the fit in this paragraph. So I kind of interpret this one as relative. So if you are relatively strong, then your enemy will become weak. If you are more ordered, then your enemy will become disordered. So that's my interpretation. I don't read this one as deceive your enemy. I see more on the comparison enemy based on the Chinese word I read, and then based on the meaning it should fit the entire paragraph, because eventually Sun Tzu want to talk about here is about three concepts. The one it talk about the number and shi and the formation. So the turmoil is produced by your order. The enemy's fear is produced by your bravery. Their weakness is produced by your strength. For this reason, orderliness or turmoil is determined by managing the numbers. Bravery or fears is determined by creating shi. Strength or weakness is determined by military formation. Therefore, those who are good at maneuvering the enemy can configure the army to make the enemy follow. They can give up something to make the enemy snatch the bait. Okay, they provide profit to move the enemy. They deploy a soldier to wait for the enemy. So thank you. Amang, please.
Yeah, I want to say I was very impressed because Jason's interpretation makes more sense than any translation I'd seen. Adding in the parentheticals clarifies it a great deal, because as has been mentioned in the past, very often in classic Chinese, the subject is simply omitted. It's meant to be known or understood. And so the reader will very often have to figure it out on their own, who or what the subject being addressed is. But when you make those distinctions clear, that their turmoil is your order, their fear is your bravery, and so on, I really like how this translation plays out to lay out something very clear that I think almost anybody can understand firsthand. Any of us who've ever just lost it around someone who has maintained their composure know the experience of being in the losing position well before you start the argument or whatever else it is. You just have somebody there who is unshakable, unflappable, and can doggedly continue to pick at you. That's Sun Tzu's advice here. If you can be that anchor, that force that is unshaken, even while the slings and arrows of life are coming around you, that is the story of the 300 of Thermopylae. I mean, it was, literally a sky blacked with arrows, and the famous quote, "We'll fight in the shade."
Wonderful. So folks, go ahead and type an exclamation mark to make your comments. We're going to start with Bill. Bill, go ahead.
I see a connection here between the phrase maintain deceitful appearances and the phrase sacrifice something that the enemy will snatch at, and the word the type of discipline talked about earlier in the paragraph, and the type of courage. So if one is going to fake weakness by sending out a small formation that's going to appear vulnerable to the other side, either because of its small size or because of its location, there's no way to do that in a way that does not create some actual vulnerability of that small formation. The trick is to do it in a way where they're not so vulnerable that they get crushed, but they're going to have to be a little vulnerable if they're really going to fake weakness and vulnerability convincingly to the other side. And that's going to require the men in that small formation to have courage. And and one way to do that is to have the discipline that's talked about earlier in the chapter, where the main force says to the small force, that's the bait, we've got your back. We're not going to let you get crushed. We've got the discipline. We're going to show up for you and save you after they've taken the bait and rendered themselves vulnerable. So that's the kind of strategizing in general she's talking about. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Thank you, Bill. Next up is Evanique. Evanique, go ahead.
Yeah, something that Aman said when he was saying, how you're in the argument and you lose it and the other person remains calm, and he calls it the anchor. And I think if the anchor is stable, but I also think of the anchor as, in a sense, bringing you down. And so when I think of that, and you're in a battle, it's like you're bringing the enemy down to you, and and then you're going to hit them. And someone had made the mention of Muhammad Ali in doing the same thing, and I thought about that too, where you tire out your enemy. The point is, like, you get your enemy hyped up and then watch them crumble. And it could be a strategy to also use against an enemy that you think is bigger than you, or someone that you think is more powerful than you. You could just kind of remain calm and see kind of a sense like where they're coming from, what are they doing this for? And then you can strategically come back and, figure out what to do next. So I think it's a discipline, because you have to control your emotions, and you can't really get hype. Like, you can't, as much as you want to respond, as much as you want to, lose it, it's a certain discipline in remaining calm. And so I just like that. So thank you.
Thank you, Evanique. Next up is Maritza, followed by Joe. Maritza.
I really appreciate Jason's translation here. I agree with Aman. It changes and makes more sense to me, the meaning of what is being said here. I love the idea that, it's being done onto. It changes in my mind the meaning. Like, I love the idea of, the weakness is produced by your strength, because what it says to me is that in being strong, that is the way in which I foster weakness within my enemy or my opponent. And I don't see it quite that way when I look at some of the other translations, but it's beautifully stated there. And it takes it out of the realm of just thinking of, soldiers and war, because obviously it's applicable, but it transcends that, because the idea of my strength is what brings about the weakness, or it would be my order causes someone else to be more turmoil and leaving me in a position of power. That takes the perceived control in my mind away from them, and it seats it firmly within me, as it should be. So I think that it's just beautiful to state it in that way, because it, if you look at it, if you take a step back and you look at it, what you're ultimately saying is that the power lies within you, whether you will be the one holding the seat of power or not. And I think that it's just beautifully stated with that translation. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Maritza. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, so I'm looking at simulated disorder postulates perfect discipline, and simulated weaknesses postulates strength. And I think that this just only comment that I'll make that I think will just push us forward a little bit is that this is not this is again about saving energy. So this is what this chapter is about. So it's not necessarily about using brute force when you're attacking. It's about actually using tactical decisions that actually then preserve energy so that you can move more effectively. So I think that that's the most important part about this when we're putting it in the context of the chapter.
Wonderful. So now we'll go for the reading of the final part, and the discussion today is going to be, how is this Chinese way of thinking that Sun Tzu brings to the discipline of war different than the Western way of thinking? That's what we'll be talking about after we're done with discussing the final verses. Who'd like to read? Go ahead and type exclamation mark. There will be somebody and then Penny, because Penny has a different translation. So James, go ahead.
I'm sorry. The clever combatant looks to the effect of combined energy and does not require too much from individuals. Hence, his ability to pick out the right men and to utilize combined energy. When he utilizes combined energy, his fighting men become, as it were, like unto rolling logs or stones. For it is the nature of a log or stone to remain motionless on level ground and to move when on a slope. If four-quartered, to come to a standstill. But if round-shaped, to go rolling down. Thus, the energy developed by good fighting men is as the momentum of a round stone rolled down a mountain thousands of feet in height. So much for the subject of energy.
Thank you. Thank you, James. Penny.
Okay. Therefore, a skilled commander seeks victory from the situation and does not demand it of his subordinates. He selects his men and they exploit the situation. He who relies on the situation uses his men in fighting as one rolls logs or stones. Now, the nature of logs and stones is that on stable ground, they are static. On unstable ground, they move. If square, they stop. If round, they roll. Thus, the potential of troops skillfully commanded in battle may be compared to that of round boulders which roll down from mountain heights.
Thank you. Thank you, Penny. Jason.
Yeah, so that's the last paragraph in this one. So I just I think that the best way is next week we are going to, because chapter 6 a little bit long, so we will break up to 2. So I think the beginning of next week, I will, I think I have a small presentation about 是, okay? Take a few minutes. We probably can have more time to discuss what's the meaning of 是. And then we continue on the chapter 6 for 虚实, the virtuality and the reality, for about 2-3 paragraphs. And the week after, we can finish chapter 6. So I think that's the plan for next week and the week after. So here, when we talk the plan, I would like to talk about on the previous paragraph a little bit on the end of this one. If I translate as I highlight this one first, okay. Okay, so the orderness or turmoil is determined by managing the number here. Bravery and fear is determined by creating 势. Strength and weakness is determined by the military formation. So here, I think Sun Tzu is talking to the general, right? You all want your military army is in order. You want to have a strong army. You want to have your soldiers are brave, okay? But you don't request the people to do it. You need to create a 势. When we talk about bravery or fear, we are talking about 势 to the general. You can say, oh, you are coward. No, you create a right 势, then your soldier will become bravery. Okay, so if we want to reflect the Plato's dialogue, lectures, right? They discuss the bravery. So here's a different idea for Plato. Okay, bravery is not knowledge, it's a 势. Okay, unfortunately, Plato didn't know this. So that continue on the last paragraph. Therefore, those who are good at warfare will create favorable 势 instead of blaming on other individuals, right? So you don't blame on the people. As a general, you create the right 势 and select the right people. They will do the right job. That's Sun Tzu's idea. Hence, they can pick the right people, utilizing their 势. Utilizing 势 to fight the animal is like a rolling rock and stones. Okay, so here continue a metaphor. So when I read this one, I cannot stop thinking about Aristotelian's physics, right? So we talk about potentiality and actuality. I think if you only read this part, you probably will see, that's the physics from Aristotle. Okay, so there is the nature of logs and the stone. They are motionless when at rest, unstoppable when moving down a steep slope, unmovable if they are square, and mobile if they are rounded. Thus, the 势 of the people who are good at Thus, the 势 of the people who are good at warfare is like round stone rolling down from a 1,000-foot high mountain. This is 势. So let's conclude for this one. Sun Tzu want to explain. My understanding is the audience is the general. The decision already made by the prince. You go to the war. So the general need to do first thing is create in the battlefield. You need to create a 势. In this 势, the soldier, the military will be in order. The soldier will be brave, okay, and the military will be strong. This not depend on the people. It depends on the 势 you created. So that's the conclusion for today. And the next week I will start from a short presentation about 势. We can discuss what is 势, and then we will continue to the first half of the chapter 6. Okay, so about 虚实, virtuality, and the reality. Yeah, Aman, please.
Thank you. Hopefully the boulders and rolling and potentiality and not blaming others, maybe that image I kept sharing makes more sense now. But I want to briefly share with you an article I looked up by Nancy Yunhua Ro on musical theory and 是 in musical theory. She is examining Happy Rain on a Spring Night, which is a classic Dufu Chinese poem, and a piece of music that's set to it. And she's talking about the shi that these two things have. And she opens by saying that it can be described as dynamic configuration, or the probability and propensity that drives the process, which is a mouthful. Then she go ahead and quotes in the article, the different appearance of mountains and streams are produced by the combination of qi and shi. And there she uses the expression vital energy and dynamic configuration. But then we find that she says shi is everywhere in Chinese culture, ranging from war strategy to Taoism to literature, paintings, calligraphy, and music, and can be translated as force, gesture, tendency. Elsewhere, it's translated as potential, power, momentum, vitalism, necessary imperative. I looked this article up because, like I said, I did my homework, because this is a hard concept to wrap your head around. But I started off by talking about the idea of vitality. And we in a Western mindset would not think of vitality in its sort of vital humors, medical roots in ancient Greece. We'd see it, maybe we'd have some association there, but we understand that it's moved into something of just an adjective of its own, and it has an aesthetic quality that we can look at something and call it vital. The Chinese can look at something or hear something and say, it has shi, it has that potentiality, that momentum, that propensity moving it forward. Wiley and the Roadrunner are a cartoon with a simple formula. Hungry coyote wants to eat Roadrunner and is always outdone, no matter how good the configuration of his plans, no matter how well timed his execution, he's always thwarted. And if anyone was like me, they've thought to themselves, why in God's name didn't he order from someplace other than Acme? But like the good general, he didn't blame others. He didn't put his failings on their faulty product. He dusted himself off and tried again. That image, I could not be doing the study of homework on shi and not come back to Saturday morning cartoons again and again and again and see that vitality in action, and even see the comedy as having its own shi, its own perpetual motion that drives the story on, so that you want to watch again and again and again, in some hope that maybe he'll catch him, even though you know he never will. I have too many things to possibly get into even the last half hour, so I'm going to be as terse as I humanly possibly can. The idea of regular troops and surprise troops and drawing out the opponent's strategy. This is feigning. This is trying to get someone else to react to see what they really want. And warfare has a great deal of strategy that needs to, and tactics that need to work towards that ends. Talking about the Great Wall, yes, I agree with Quan. It was a series of outposts to launch attacks on the Shangyu, but it was an excuse for public works under Qin Shi Huangdi that became a visual representation of a very Sun Tzu idea of a walled city being the most defensible of structures. It may have only served as an aesthetic because it did not actually stop a Mongol invasion, but it was a powerful, powerful visual indication of how serious China was about protecting itself. And the last thing I want to mention is Jason was talking about the audience of this, and I agree there are different audiences, but I wanted to also point out that the Sun Tzu is written as a pedagogical text. It is written to teach people. And because it's written to teach people, there is rhythm and rhyme and method to its lessons as they unfold. We spent a lot of time last week talking about the emphasis on defense and about controlling the things you control, because these are important lessons. And it made me think of the Karate Kid saying, when am I going to learn how to punch? When am I going to learn how to punch? You may want to offense, but defense is something that takes that courage, that discipline, that stiff upper lip Evanique was talking about, to absorb those attacks. The dirty little secret about teaching sparring, whether it's in martial arts or boxing or anything else, the person who's holding the pad is actually doing the training, not the person hitting it. Because what they're learning is how to absorb a punch without it scaring the hell out of them. That is the real lesson. And the last thing about your strength being their weakness, your order being their turmoil. I want to pull your attention to Napoleon and his conquest of continental Europe and his defeat at the hands of a naval Britain, because they forced him to defend everywhere at once, basically, while they sailed and attacked wherever they wanted. These were just some of the things I could talk about. Xerox, I still have Buster Douglas and or Lennox Lewis and Mike Tyson in head, but I'll shut up. I want to give everyone else a chance to talk. And I want to thank you all because you had some great ideas and insights today.
Thank you. Thank you, Amon. Next up is Evanique. Evanique.
Yeah, I actually thought about what Amon said about Wile E. Coyote. And another thing that I noticed about Wile E. Coyote is, I always forget the character he was trying to get, but the person he was trying to get always reversed any attack that he had on him, he reversed it, and it attacked him even more. And I was thinking of that, and I was thinking of this chapter, and the thing of it is, it's like when you stand grounded, when you are the anchor, like Amal was saying, not only do you learn how to absorb the hit, but at some point you can reverse it back on the person. It's two ways, actually. The way I see it is two ways. It's one, that the person gets worn down. Two, that their vulnerabilities are exposed, and that now you can use their vulnerability against them, but you can also kind of use their strength against them too. Like Wile E. Coyote, going back to that example, he had the best laid plans. He had the most elaborate plans in the world. And, his bait, was always watching him. And they were like, okay, I see what you're doing. Okay, I see the attack coming. Okay, great. When it's time, I know what to do. And I think that's key. It's like waiting. I'm going to go into your question really quick, and then I'm going to stop because I see a lot of hands. Your question was about what's the difference between the Chinese culture and Western culture, right? When it comes to war.
That question we are going to go into after this discussion is over. We'll just focus on
then I'll wait
the
then.
entire discussion on that. Okay, perfect.
Okay, I'll wait then.
Thank you. Next, let's go to David because he didn't get a chance to speak earlier. David, go ahead.
But it's still not time to talk about historical
You can.
examples.
Now everything is fair game because we have completed the chapter.
We're kind of swinging. Okay. So I thought it was interesting. Cornwall, the British general, had much greater forces than the Americans, George Washington. And yet Washington had the intel that told him he had the position over Cornwall because there was nowhere to cross except the Chadsford. And they prepared that night. And in the morning, I think it was foggy. So the small set of British troops starts to come, into the vulnerable zone. Here they come. And, Washington's coming down. And I believe that's where it happened, that this was a huge feint because the knowledge that Cornwall had was so much better. His intel said there are other crossing points, and he already had his major army crossing up north. And this was just a small mercenary group that he was sacrificing until they realized it's too late. We can't stop them. So yeah, I think that this literature wasn't accessible and read at those times because it's this force is, Amon's maybe going to respond to that. But
I was just going to say not by them.
Not by them. Okay, that could be because of the interest in Chinese culture and the East comes up at different times in the West. But I thought that was an instructive case. Whereas when it came to Yorktown, that was Washington's own native area. He knew Virginia, he knew that, and when he knew they were cornered and they had the superior position, he was absolutely, so your intel also affects what you can be fooled by. And you have to know how well you're reading the enemy and how well your own intel, how secure it is. So the intel, was in a prior chapter. You avoid fighting till you have to, but you can't be certain of things because it's only as good as the people you're sending out to get that intel. That's all.
Thank you, David. Next up is going to be Bill, James, Quan, Joe, and Evanique. Bill.
Thanks. I see a connection here between his advice not to rely too much on individuals and rely more on combined energy on one hand, and his distinction between the logs and stones that are motionless versus the logs and stones that are rolling. And the connection is that the logs and stones that are motionless seems to me to be a metaphor for strategic paralysis or tactical paralysis. And kind of paralysis is more likely the smaller the group, down to the single individual, is most vulnerable to tactical paralysis, where they've lost their energy to do what energy requires, which is constantly being on the move to broadcast signals that are fake to the enemy, constantly collecting intel to see whether fake signals have been bossed by the enemy, constantly collecting intel on the enemy's movements to distinguish which of their movements betrays their real position versus which is fakes, etc. All of that the ability to do all that gets lost if one is stuck in strategic paralysis as an individual or a very small group can get stuck in. So his advice is to have larger groups where there can be a division of labor between the intel gatherers and the decision makers and other things. Men in a larger group can bolster the courage of some of the men in the group who are losing courage. And the final point I'd make here is that I would distinguish between strategic level energy and tactical level energy, because nowadays with communication technology being so good, every small group of 5 soldiers can relate intel in the moment back through technology to headquarters and get advice on what to do. But 2,500 years ago, small tactical groups out on their own had to have their own intel gathering and decision making to keep their energy, as Sensu defines it, going in their own maneuver. So I'll stop there. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Bill. Next up is James, followed by Quan. James.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the translation once again is so stunning. Jason, I think this really works well. The idea that sh is actually what is bringing those good at work warfare. It's what is actually behind those that are good at warfare and picking individuals, picking the right people, picking the right group formations, and then comparing it to logs and stones, and they could be shaped in a way that is static, but they can also have the power of rolling down a 1,000-foot mountain again. So that's my favorite metaphor, the idea of like absolute power, so we have to. I think that's just it's a very good climax to the chapter, because it's and to mention Aristotle is not out of place. That's exactly Aristotle's physics, chapter 4. You just can't you can't get his analogies about rocks in motion out of your head if you understand what he's saying. So, and then the final one final sentence. This is shit. I mean, yeah, absolutely. It's this is the most important thing, and but it's a summary of things. It's not just one thing. It's not this absolute power of the force of a torrent of water or rocks rolling down a mountain, but it's the It's the right choices. It's that starts out with the idea of the right choices, not assigning blame to others. Perfect.
Thank you. Thank you, James. Next up is Kwan, Joe, and Evanique. Kwan.
Okay. Since now everything is fair game, I would like to make a rapprochement that is not maybe obvious in the context, but I promise it has a link. Okay. I think that shu is probably one of the most difficult word to translate, and it's not for nothing that it's one of the most difficult word to translate, because I think in Chinese culture is probably the key concept making the relation between what I call the timeless dimension and the time dimension, or if you want, the divine dimension and the animal dimension. Because I would like to use two general principles, okay, that I want to state. The first principle is that true knowledge is really difficult. Doing is much easier, contrary to what most people think. Okay, most people think that doing is more difficult, but it's not true. True knowledge is much more difficult. That is the first general principles. And the second general principle would be the gentleman is capable to retreat without losing his true nature. And I explain why those two general principles apply here. Because, as I said maybe an hour ago, the 64 configurations of the 64 hexagrams from the I Ching is called shu. Okay, so we have 64 shu or dynamic configuration. And those 64 dynamic configuration are precisely in the dynamic course. Okay, they are changing from one moment to the other. And that configuration can be favorable or unfavorable to a certain action. Okay, and war is certainly an action that we want to know if it's favorable or unfavorable to us. So sometimes if you have true knowledge, meaning once again, true knowledge is really difficult. If you have true knowledge, sometimes you need to understand that it is inappropriate to go to war at that given specific time. And I want to take a very down-to-earth example. If you read history, many declining empires, if not dying empires, most of the time the elite are incapable to understand that it's not the time to lash out at everyone, trying to keep what they have, but to accept the situation and to conform with the reality. And of course, if we read history, no dying or declining empire was capable to be in the true knowledge mode, but rather in the reacting mode. So that true understanding of reality, precisely because it is the relation between timeless reality and time reality, and timeless reality is precisely beauty, goodness, and truth. Sometimes the whole of the universe is not allowing you to be in a dominating position anymore. And that is where the second position, general proposition is interesting, meaning the true gentleman knows when to retreat and not losing his true nature. Meaning the person capable to rule, to have power, is someone that will not be bound by the result because he has true knowledge. Sometimes it's appropriate to attack, sometimes it's appropriate not to attack, sometimes it's appropriate to retreat. So that shu is really the kairos, okay? Because if I have to use a Greek word, a Western word to translate shu, my favorite word would be kairos, because kairos, K-A-I-R-O-S, is the Greek word meaning the channel of communication that is opening between that timeless dimension of beauty, goodness, and truth, and the time dimension of precisely configuration of strategies, of actions, and of intellect, and of sense of perception, of vitality. Okay, we were speaking of vitality. Vitality is part of the time dimension, but that vitality is it used respecting the reality, the matching of the timeless reality and the time reality, or that vitality is simply used in a haphazard manner and sometimes inappropriate manner. So I want to stop here by repeating the two major principles allowing shu to connect the timeless dimension and the time dimension. true knowledge is really difficult. To do without thinking is much easier. And a true gentleman is capable to retreat without losing his true nature. I stop here.
This is wonderful. Quan, this is fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much. Next up is going to be Joe, Evanique, and Mark. Joe.
Yeah, that was really remarkable, Quan, on a number of levels. It's kind of blowing me away a little bit. I'm just looking at Jason's translation really quickly, is that when I think about the deep slope, the unstoppable when moving down a deep slope, unmovable if they are squared, and mobile if they are well-rounded. And it's the idea, obviously, that you're picking the right troops, but you're also communicating right action to them. So that the idea that it comes back to in the beginning, it comes back to proper coordination and proper communication that also is required in order to make that, to sustain that momentum in the right direction. So it kind of ties together with, I just think, point number one as well.
Thank you, Joe. And I'm going to pick up on what Quan said once we begin the discussion of how is the Chinese approach, Sun Tzu's approach to war, different from the Western approach? Because I think what Quan said is very much relevant to that. Next up is going to be Evanique, followed by Mark. Evanique.
I was going to answer that question, but if you want Ian to go first,
yes,
feel free.
Yes, let's go with Mark. Mark, go ahead.
Thanks, Shrikant. I want to go back to what Quan was saying about the difficulty of true knowledge, what David had mentioned about Washington knowing the terrain better than the British, and about what it says in 3:18, know yourself and your enemy. And I wrote down the word, I thought what it sounded like to my ears at the time when we did chapter 3, that the word was tse, something like that, for knowledge. And I know that Jason had spent a while talking about this, and he, at the time, instead of wanting to just translate it as knowledge, was going further in the sense of foretelling, because he thought that it had a sort of anticipatory dimension. And so in view of all of this talk of knowledge, I'm wondering, Jason, why you want to back away from the comparison of Plato in the Laches, where even though the dialogue ends in aporia, or sort of perplexity, we already get the hint that courage is a form of knowledge, and in fact is going to be collapsed down into the unity of the virtues as all being a form of knowledge. I'm wondering about that, Jason, why you want to distinguish Plato.
Let's do one thing. This is after 10 o'clock, so Jason is, I don't know if Jason is around. Jason, yes, if you'd like to answer it, please go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the question. I just about to leave. So can
Okay.
Can you repeat your question?
Go ahead, Mark, if you could.
Jason, in view of 3:18, to know your enemy, to know yourself, why do you want to back away from comparing what's going on here with Plato and the Laches, who wants to suggest that courage is a form of knowledge?
I didn't get your question. You said you talk about the bravery. Okay, it's a okay. Why I want to compare this one with Plato's Laches?
I thought you were trying to distinguish them.
Yeah, I try to distinguish it. I think that when the Plato, when I think what's his name? Two generals, right?
Yes, Laches and Nicias.
Yeah, Nicias, right? Nicias talk about it's a knowledge is good to train, and the Laches talk about it's a form of knowledge, but there is no value. So I think here, Sun Tzu's idea is bravery actually is created by Shi. If you have the right Shi, okay, then your soldier will be bravery. So that's I try to say, that probably that's a third opinion other than Nicias and Laches, So that's the kind of my thought. So.
Thank you, Jason, and appreciate you stepping in to answer that question. Okay, all right, folks. So I want to go to the next. We finished it. Jason, do you have any last thoughts before we continue on the discussion?
No. I'm glad I have the chance to answer Mark's question because his question was challenging. So
thank you.
All right.
All right. Thanks. Okay. So now